President Whitman, thank you. Class of 2018, you have received a great liberal arts education. Your professors have asked you to explore the past that was, to analyze and critique the present that is, and to imagine the futures that can be. Education is about knowledge, critical thinking, empathy, humanity, creativity, and imagination. If we cannot imagine, we cannot change. If we cannot imagine, we cannot build. If we cannot imagine, we cannot believe in a better world. The world Bishop Michael Curry asked us to imagine this morning, guided by the way of love, for those of you who, like me, got up to watch the royal wedding. This afternoon, I'm going to ask you to imagine a world of true and full gender equality, and to think about what you can do personally as you leave this beautiful place and begin making your way in the world to help bring it about. What would real gender equality look like? To begin with, we would have a roughly equal number of men and women in all positions of power. A world in which we truly erased stereotypes of what men and women are good at or natural for, in which we judged people for who they actually are and not by what we consciously or subconsciously expect them to be. Our behavior would change, not just the behavior of women, but also the behavior of men. We know from very good social science research that in a group of people who are roughly 20% women and 80% men, when you ask them to divide a hypothetical budget between spending on guns versus spending on butter, defense spending or social spending, if they're only 20% women, the breakdown actually comes back about 80% on guns and 20% on butter. If you have 30% women, that number goes up. It's about 30% then on butter and particular kinds of social spending, and 70% on defense, the whole gamut of defense spending. Once you have 40% women, things really change. The difference, you get to about 50-50 in terms of spending, but here's the key part. It's not just that the women are much more free to say what they really think rather than what they are expected to think, or often to imitate what men would do in that situation. And I do not believe all women want to vote for butter and all men want to vote for guns. I'm a national security expert, but I do believe that many women hesitate to say what they really think because they think they should act like men. But here's the kicker. Men change their behavior. There are many men who would have voted differently from the beginning, except that they are trapped by expectations of what it is to be a man. So if we had a world that were really 50-50, roughly, depending on personality and not gender, men would behave differently as well as women. And if we think, as we must think today, of Me Too and of sexual harassment, which actually obviously affects women more than men, but also affects men, if we had a world that was roughly 50-50, we would have men and women listening, men and women judging, men and women drawing on their collective life experience rather than one gender silence in face of presumptions favoring another. What can you do to bring about that world in which not only we would be roughly 50-50, but you would be who you are rather than behaving according to a stereotype of what you think you ought to be? You can bring that about by being who who you are. Slowly, cautiously. Many of the women in this audience know what it is to be in an audience mostly of men, and you feel your way. But remember the 20%, 30%, 40%, 50%. Say what you really think. Be who you actually are. Real equality between the genders would also mean a world in which men and women are equally expected and equally free to combine care and career. It would mean that we no longer expecting combining and care and career of mothers, but not of fathers, of daughters, but not of sons, of sisters, but not of brothers. We would assume that all human beings have obligations to care for loved ones, for families, however constructed, for friends, for fellow community members, for fellow human beings. We would assume that men love and care just as much as women do, and that we must reshape work to make room for family, for care, for everyone. What can you do as you go forward into the workplace? Young men, you can ask for parental leave and take it. Young women, do not fall trap to the myth of superwomen who can do it all. Or if you do, then expect the same of men. We should be talking about and writing articles about supermen who manage to have a career and juggle care obligations at the same time. And to the young women, do not assume you know best in the home. Assume that he can be just as competent at home as you can be in the office. Combat your own sexism, and remember that the phrase to run a tight ship comes from the Navy. Men run tight ships. Men can run households just as effectively. It's quite remarkable. Remember that many couples are composed of two men or two women or two individuals who do not identify as either. And remember that family does not automatically mean a couple and children. Families are composed in many ways. They are composed of engaged adults who commit to love and care for one another and for children, and those children will commit one day to care for them. And when you get ready to commit to another person, be sure not simply to ask, will you support my career? But ask the harder questions. Ask, will you move for me? Will you defer your promotion so I can take mine? Will you be able to handle it if my job is bigger than yours? Will you be willing to become lead parent if our lives evolve in ways that mean I have to take a job that means I become lead breadwinner and I am often the one who is more away? Ask those questions and prepare for a world of real equality. Real gender equality will mean a world in which we shed our stereotypes of masculinity as much as of femininity. Consider ambition. It is still considered, perhaps subconsciously, but definitely there, considered unseemly for a woman to be more ambitious than a man, or indeed to be openly ambitious at all. Think about marriage patterns. It is still far more normal and acceptable for a man to marry a less ambitious woman than for a woman to marry a less ambitious man. That is one reason we have so many fewer women as CEOs, as politicians, as leaders in top positions. Male CEOs are not expected to be making doctor's appointments and play dates. Indeed, they have lead parent spouses. And so, in fact, do many women CEOs. Their spouses may well work for pay, but they are also the ones who have flexible lives, flexible careers, the ones who can be lead parents. And yet so many women and their parents, and I speak to the parents in the audience here too, so many women and their parents balk at the idea of marrying a man who is less ambitious, just as many men, and often their parents, expect to marry a woman with a career, but not necessarily a career that is bigger than theirs. We have to start thinking about choosing our mates based on personality, not on gender stereotypes. What can you do? You can start by being honest with yourself about your level of ambition and what it will take to achieve it. You can also remember that your views will change. You're 22 now. Remember what it was like when you were 12. You've changed. At 32, you'll change again, and 42, and 52. But still, think hard about what it is you think you want and what it will take. And you can also recognize that ambition comes in many different forms. I am vertically ambitious. I think about how can I make the biggest difference in the world? Mountains to climb, challenges to conquer. My husband is horizontally ambitious. We're actually both, but for him, his ambition is much more in the how can he lead the fullest life possible? How can he have a career, but how can he continually explore music and art and tennis and cooking, constantly broadening himself horizontally more than vertically? Ambition comes in many forms. As men and women, we need to make room for a world in which we again define what we want based on who we are, not on those stereotypes of what we should be. In closing, let me return to the power of imagination. Over your 4 years here, Alexander Hamilton has been reimagined brilliantly. I have to confess here that I grew up in Charlottesville, Virginia. That's not Hamilton territory. That is Jefferson territory. I am a Jefferson by birth, if not by political conviction. But as I was growing up, Alexander Hamilton was an icon of the establishment. He was the Federalist Secretary of the Treasury, the man, the founding father who favored business, who favored a strong national bank, who favored national industrial policy. Through the magical imagination of Lin-Manuel Miranda, he has been reimagined as the immigrant outsider, the brilliant man who lived by his wits and his words as he made his way in the world and remade the world he was in. That is what imagination can do. Imagining a different world is the first step toward achieving it. Our founders imagined a world in which all white men could be equal. Successive generations of Americans have broadened that promise to imagine a world in which all human beings can be equal, regardless of race, gender, color, creed, sexual orientation, or national origin. You are fortunate enough to have the education, the energy, and the tools to bring that world about. Reflect on this day, on this place, and the traditions of this great college, and go forth and do your part. Congratulations to the class of 2018, and to the loved ones, faculty, staff, administrators, and alumni who got you here today. Thank you very much.